So we're live here with Richard Van Steenberg from ET UFO Disclosure. Richard, thanks for being on the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's just get into it. I read that you suspect that Donald Trump contracted the coronavirus on purpose because he's an immortal alien. Is that true?
Well, to give you a little bit more of a backstory, basically what happened is I'm saying something similar to that, but it's a little bit, if you really listen to what I'm saying on a daily basis, there's a lot more. That's not exactly what I'm saying. What happens is because the ufology community and people who are interested in ET and UFOs have a certain set of things they like to say and stuff like that. When they talk to me, I'm very specific, and a lot of the terminology that I use doesn't even exist currently like if you look it up, it's not in the English language, it's not in dictionaries and stuff like that. So what they do is they kind of take what I say and they then port it to either satisfy their own readers,
or make it sensationalist.
Sensationalized, or whatever. And I'm cool with that, because one of the things, like I even said with MJ, was if the public thinks that the ufology community is the fringe and they're kind of seen as crazy or whatever, I would say that I'm even seen as even more bizarre, because what I'm basically saying is that the reason the ufology community has spent 7 decades and cannot solve the ET UFO phenomenon is because of 2 things. One, they're not willing to consider that ET is living among us on Earth in humanoid form. So they're basically waiting for a being to come down to Earth who's in a little 3-foot tall body,
like an ET looking
a typical ET that people might think of, for example. And so that's one of the scenarios that I'm trying to explain to them, that a mistake, and they don't want to. They're not comfortable then saying, well, why hasn't ufology pushed this issue for 7 decades? Why are you saying it? And I'm saying, well, I'm not a ufologist. I'm a hetologist, a person that studies HET.
So I was going to get into that. Some of the terminology that I've read that you use is like HET, CEA, ETA. What is an HET?
So an HET is a humanoid extraterrestrial. So, for example, you know how people, a lot of times if you read in the ufology community, they try and define it as ET versus humans. In other words, they're saying that humans are earthlings. And the point that I'm trying to make out to them is that when they live among us in the humanoid form, you can't, for example, you could be one or I could be one. We can't tell the difference between them. And that's their secret to their power on Earth, in that they can live among us and be the president. I'm not saying he is 100% for sure. I'm saying it's possible. It could be Melania, it could be Obama, it could be Hollywood movie stars, it could be people who are running corporations, it could be leaders of the military, fighter pilots. But so when you study them, what they use is the term hybrid.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, like human-alien hybrid. Is that what you're implying?
So what I'm trying to point out to them is that there's nobody who's authoritative for the term hybrid. Every person that you speak to has a slightly different interpretation of what hybrid means. And what I'm explaining to them is that, in theory, a hybrid could be visually identifiable because they wouldn't be perfectly humanoid like we think of an earthling. And what I'm saying is that you need to refine the terminology, being extremely precise and accurate with it. And the reason they can't figure it out is because they're not willing to go and be that strict. And so an HET would be an example of, let's just hypothetically say the president or some of the presidents through history have been extraterrestrials in humanoid form. That would be an HET, because when you look at them, you think they're all earthlings, right?
But what are you saying, though? That if you like peeled their skin off, like remember the old 80s show Visitor, they were reptilians underneath?
What I'm saying is that, and this is where it gets really beyond a normal, entry-level discussion. What I'm saying is that all living beings that exist are actually spirits, if that's a term that a person's comfortable with. Maybe you want to say souls or whatever, but
entities.
The term spirit is the most common form I can find that people talk about. And your body is just nothing more than a temporal container that ET, because they know how to create life and they know how to take the spirit out of the body when the body dies and put it into a new body. The body is nothing more than a container. So a typical ET being could say, okay, I'm going to go down to Earth today and put myself in a humanoid body form, walk around among the Earthlings. Then I'm going to come back to my planet later tonight, and I'm going to put myself in the 3-foot tall guy with almond-shaped eyes and antennas, or remember this,
So they're possessing the bodies is what they're doing.
Yeah, but the trick is that so are the Earthlings, but the Earthlings don't know it. In other words, we've been deprived of the total understanding of what's taking place. So when your mother and father created you, you think that the sperm and the egg came together and the DNA and the body formed. What really is happening is there's an additional step that's going on there, and it's the reason why Earthlings can't understand how life works, is that ET is using the two beings as vessels to bring the spiritual form onto the planet. So we're similar in the sense that we're all in these body forms. The difference is they won't let us know that when we die, they can take us out of it and put it into another body form. And at the same time, they won't allow us to understand concepts like mental telepathy or telekinesis or other abilities that they may have in the humanoid form. They give us like a degraded version. It's like we're all driving around in low budget Volkswagens and they're all in high performance Porsches. But when you look at it, it's basically a car.
Well,
it's the same premise.
Real quick, you keep saying the pronoun they, like they. So who is the they? Is this like some kind of like cosmic entity, like the Beyonders or the Celestials that control everything?
Well, I would say it's ET from the standpoint of, if you just break it down to the most basic core event of what's taking place, it's ET, meaning these other beings that existed before Earth existed. And then you have Earthlings, and I use the term "a" because it's the first two letters from the word Earthling.
Okay.
So it's basically ET versus EA. And when I say they, I'm basically referring to ET in a general sense.
Okay, these alien beings. And so you imply that these alien beings have like a plot to take over the planet. Like why? Why would they want it, I guess, is my question.
Okay, so it's if you use an analogy of like the animal kingdom, man thinks that he's a higher order being to animals. So for example, we're the top of the food chain on Earth. All the other animals are below us because we have an intellect. And so if you use that same premise and you think of Earthlings as a lower order being and extraterrestrials as a higher order being, they would see us as essentially like you would, if you had a ranch and you had horses on it, you would use the horses to develop your ranch, to go out and plow the fields and to ride around to get places and stuff like that. So they use us as basically a lower level being to accomplish their goals, which, gets
like what are their goals?
Pardon me?
Like what are their goals?
Well, so when you look at how they live in space, they create star systems and planets, and then as they die, they put themselves in new bodies and they keep living perpetually. And as their systems go on, some of the extraterrestrial systems, for example, the one we live in, make a decision to try to gain more power. And what they do is on one of the planets they create, they literally put beings on the planet and they don't tell them what's going on. And then they harvest them, essentially, for lack of a better way to describe them, as intellectual slaves, and they use them to do the work for them at a lower, so for example,
like Mark Zuckerberg, would he be an example of that? Like a CEO? He kind of looks like an alien.
Yeah, like I don't like to sit here and say, because I can't prove that he is, but hypothetically, he would profile as the type of person who would be one, yes.
Elon Musk, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So in other words, if you say the name of a famous, notable, either national or globally known person that both you and I would recognize right now, and you and I have never met each other before, so we don't know what our likes and dislikes and who we know and don't know. Anytime you mention a person who's a nationally known or globally known figure who can speak and immediately command mainstream media attention and get their voice heard, there's like a 99% chance they're either an HET, meaning a extraterrestrial being residing among us here on Earth, or a CEA, a complicit Earthling helping the HET, because as you become
alien plot.
Yeah, because what happens is let's say right now your show becomes really successful, and all of a sudden millions and millions of people are tuning in you. They would have to pull you aside and tell you what's going on, because you would be able to influence the way society works at a certain point, because your opinion would become so popular.
So you're saying, like, right now, the aliens don't care about me. But if my show started becoming popular and, millions of followers started listening to the show, then they'd be like, this guy's an influencer. We need to tap into him.
So there's a thing called the ETA, the extraterrestrial architecture. In other words, before they created Earth and before they put us on it, they planned the whole thing out. And every day they're assessing how is the plan going versus how are the events taking place in real time, and comparing to see like an airplane flying from LA to New York. They're making sure, are we going to make it to New York safely and land? And if there's an in-flight emergency, how are we going to deal with it? Well, if they see that people on the plane are creating problems by disseminating information to the passengers that's going to cause chaos on the plane, they're going to have to go. Have you ever seen the movie The Adjustment Bureau?
Oh, I think I have seen that, actually.
It's with Matt Damon and Emily Blunt, and they figure out halfway through their lives that their lives are scripted, and they try to stop living the script. And they don't say they're aliens, but these guys come in from the Adjustment Bureau and they start telling them, hey, look, if you change your life, bad things are going to happen. And so so for me, I'm even saying the people that are running Hollywood are making these movies to subliminally insert the information in our minds so that when they reveal to us what's going on, it won't be that difficult for them to explain to us,
comprehend it.
Yeah, you already have most of the information in your mind. It hasn't been connected. It hasn't been given the technically accurate terminology to explain it.
So when you say what's going on, like, do you think there's a plot? Like, there's going to be a point where the aliens are like, we're just going to take over everything now, and this is going to be our planet?
So I would say that they've had control of it since day one, since they put us on here as cavemen.
So we're like an ant farm in a sense.
Yeah, the problem, and they're part of the ants because they can reside in the form of the beings that they're running. Okay. The problem is that because the Earthlings don't believe that and they aren't willing to contemplate it, they think that Earthlings are controlling the planet, and randomly the events that are just happening are how the planet's being controlled. And they think that for ET to control it, they would have to come down here, maybe attack us or, whatever. And what I'm saying is that ET is so smart, they've already got complete control of the planet. The problem they have is they have to continue to implement the technological infrastructure so that they can spread the message around faster. For example, if they tried to do disclosure in the year 1500, it would have taken 500 years for them to get everybody on the planet to understand what they're trying to say.
Because of technology, yeah.
Yeah, so when you see, like, are you familiar with the movie The Phenomenon that just came out?
I haven't seen that.
So that's a guy, James C. Fox. It's the latest thing that came out in the ufology community. Is all just so excited about it because it's the most current information. And what I'm trying to explain to these guys is that's what's called subnation, where ET is producing all this stuff and they're putting it out there to get you guys to read it on a daily basis. So you're getting closer and closer to understanding what's going on without actually understanding what's going on. And what that does is it makes it so that when ET decides to tell us, everybody's going to be like, oh, no big deal. We already knew this, because they think that the answer is ET and UFOs exist. They don't realize that you have to take it to a higher level of HET, live among us, and they've been here the whole time.
And that we've been being controlled by these HETs.
Unknowingly.
So let's just go back a bit to the coronavirus. So how does this come into effect? Like, why would these ETs want a virus to wipe out their ants, so to speak?
So if you go back to the beginning before Earth existed, ET has the knowledge and ability to create life, to manage life when the body, whether they don't like their body anymore or they want to travel and be in a different body or just put themselves in a new body. For whatever reason, they know how to do that. So if you morph, it's called morphine. It's a new body with the same look. Or if you polymorph, it's a new body with a different look. Well, so they know how to make a perfect body, and they know how to keep the body healthy, and they know how to live at a much higher, I don't know if I'd call perfection, but a way better style of living than we live. But the trick is on Earth, because they put us down here in caveman form, they have to get us to go from caveman form to the form that they need us to be in when they do disclosure. Well, so in order to do that, they can't come down here every day and go, hey, you guys, we're living among you, and we need you to do this and make that and go over here and do this and have this happen. So what they have to do is, I don't know if you've ever heard of Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
I have, yeah. Where you invent this disease to make these people dependent upon you.
Well, and they create the problem, and then what happens is when they create the problem, the Earthlings try and figure out how to solve it because they don't want to suffer the problem anymore, and they try to prevent it from ever happening again. And what that does is It causes the Earthlings to develop the technology that ET once developed. And then it also causes them to funnel financial resources into organizations, which are usually going to be theirs, and ones that they're deeming appropriate. So they're controlling the development of the technology, they're controlling the financial resources, which is how they control the planet. So if you go back to the history of the planet and you look at every war that's been created on the planet, they started, managed, and ended every war on the planet.
The aliens, the ETs.
The ETs, and mostly doing it as HET living among us and CEA helping them. They've put every disease on the planet. They've created every basic problem that we've had, but they're not doing it to torment us. They're doing it to manipulate us in a strategic manner to allow their ETA, their extraterrestrial architecture, to come to fruition at disclosure.
So I guess my question is, how did you figure this out? Like, when did you have your realization that this is all going on, and why haven't they shut you down or imprisoned you or taken you to space jail?
I've had unpleasant experiences in my life due to my...
With the ETs?
Well, nobody came up to me and said they were ET, but I've had people that are in humanoid form that I think are HETs that, have altered my life plan on Earth from what, I planned on being a computer engineer. Well, so the thing started for me is that when I grew up, I was never interested in ET and I was never interested in UFOs. It had no, a big zero. If you came up and tried to talk to me back in the 80s, I would have immediately discontinued the conversation.
You didn't think they existed? Like, you just were like, alien life doesn't
I contemplated that, maybe they exist, but I thought it was pointless in having any discussions because it didn't seem pertinent to life to me at that time. Where my area of focus was flying and air combat. And, I wanted to be an F-14 pilot and join the Navy and be a fighter pilot. And what happened is through a lot of the people, I never ended up getting in the military, but I spent a lot of time talking to the people who were the fighter weapons instructor pilots. And I have an extremely high level understanding of flying and air combat. And so as I was talking to them about normal stuff, like, well, how is an F-14 going to intercept a MiG-29 and what's your procedures you're going to use, and I would do this on an extensive basis because that was, to me, was the most interesting thing in my life. Occasionally I would see like a documentary or something on UFOs, and I noticed the UFOs sometimes would be in formations of 3, and I knew that the military pilots didn't want to operate in formations of 3 because they didn't know how to get beyond a leader wingman mutual. You'd have to really understand air combat.
Yeah, but I've read that too, and I've seen grainy photos. It's hard to tell what they are, but it looks like there's like 3 objects.
Yeah, and so I would ask the weapons instructors. I was all, one, do you guys have a standard operating procedure to intercept UFOs? And guys that would take me out to aircraft carriers or spend hours talking on MiGs would immediately stop talking and never speak to me again, or just be really weird. And I was like, okay, these guys are acting weirder than anybody I've ever met in my whole life. When I would ask them why they can't operate in a 3-ship formation, they would sit there and say it's impossible. And I can sit here and explain, well, it's impossible because you're using leader wingman 2-ship things that come from World War II, and you haven't progressed to an intercept energy angles tactical V. So I can comprehend what extraterrestrial 3-ship.
But you've never flown a plane before, though.
Well, I've got a pilot's license, but I've never flown a jet fighter. But I'm not making a claim that I can get in, go down to one of the fighter bases and get in a jet fighter and take a fighter weapons instructor and get up and go 1v1 with him and defeat him in a fight. What I'm saying is I can sit on the ground and I can speak his terminology and tactics and language at and above his level to the point where at first, to an average person who doesn't understand air combat, it seems like, how could anybody even speak at that level? You haven't spent your life doing it. But once you realize that ET is a far superior fighter pilot, all of a sudden the fighter pilots on Earth don't actually appear that sophisticated. To an Earthling, they appear sophisticated, but to an extraterrestrial, they're actually, they can't even figure out how to get 3 planes to fly tactically in formation during a fight. It's too much for their current level of intellectual awareness. You have to be able to think extraterrestrial to comprehend how to do it. But to make it...
Well, I guess what I was getting to, so how did you know that these guys humanoids? Like, were you they're covering up something here? So
what happened to me was, as I would continue, this went on for years. It started in the 80s as I was talking to him, and I would walk away from these conversations going, this is the weirdest guy I've ever met in my life. And that didn't happen with just one of them. It happened with dozens of them. And over time, I started going, I wonder if ET, when I started contemplating the fact that maybe they're flying in the formation of three because they're better pilots and they understand three-ship tactics and our guys can't figure it out. And I started thinking, and because I never studied ET and UFOs, my mind wasn't in this mode of ET has to be a 3-foot tall guy with almond-shaped eyes and antennas or, whatever. I was like, well, what if they're in a humanoid body? And so I immediately started going, well, if I'm an extraterrestrial being and I'm in a humanoid body, the first thing I'm going to do when I land on Earth is I'm going to go to the fighter weapons schools and be an instructor pilot because I'll be better than all the other pilots on Earth. So I had a completely different take on it, my viewpoint. I started creating like a hypothesis. Well, if they were doing that, why aren't they disclosing they're down here? Because if Russia's our stated enemy and that's top secret, ET's not our stated enemy. Why would we not admit that ET exists? Why would they remain secret? And then I basically just took a militaristic understanding and viewpoint and started thinking, well, what if they're at war with us? What would a war look like between ET and the United States? What would better tactics look like? I'm like, well, they could sit there and be our pilots in our United States Navy and Air Force fighter jets, and we think that they're Earthlings.
Or generals or something, like military leaders, or the president. Yeah.
So the difference for me was I focused on the fighter pilots because I said the president needs a fighter pilot to protect him. The fighter pilots don't need the president to protect them. They're at the end of the day, the fighter pilot is the tip of the spear and he's the boundary layer between ET. So because I was always able to put myself in their position and think when they're going out and they're flying operationally and they come up against these vehicles, if they can't intercept this thing and either get it to land or shoot it down, which in my opinion at that time there was no way they could do it because even documentaries at that time were stating that these things could instantaneously accelerate beyond the speed of light.
Disappear or something. Yeah, I've seen that.
I go, so clearly it's like an adult to a child. We're the children and ET's the adult.
But you don't have any like physical evidence for these claims. Like, do you have a photo of one of them in like their other alien form?
Well,
like with antennas or anything. I mean,
no, I wouldn't say other alien forms. If you really wanted to spend time trying to understand how, like, I came to the conclusion that they were leaving hidden clues on Earth that they're going to reveal when they have disclosure. Part of the problem when they have disclosure and they say, look, we've been living among you the whole time in humanoid form, nobody's going to believe them.
You've never found like a piece of alien technology if you've been studying it this long, like an alien iPhone or a vibrator or something? There's nothing?
Well, so I would say all the technology on Earth is alien. In other words, it all existed on their planet and they're rolling it out to us on a daily basis. But what I focus on is, so for example, like
Steve Jobs, alien for sure.
I would say he profiles as one.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, you can't, just like I can't prove it. Like, for example, when I started getting into this, one of the first people I was convinced might be one was George Bush 41, the father.
George Bush Sr. Yeah.
This George Bush Sr.
Randy alien.
But one of the things I realized is even though I had certain criteria that I was coming to the conclusion allowed me to think that he was, I realized I can't prove it. But I also started to notice it's similar to the tactics that you use in the military. I don't need to define who one of them is and prove it. What I need to focus on is where are they as a group? And then focus on how large is the group, what direction are they going in? And then you could develop your tactics to be able to intercept and meet them. And as you intercepted and meeting them to start being able to figure out how you're going to fight them, that's when you start deciding on who's going to fight one-on-one with which person. What a normal ufologist or a person who doesn't know what I knew does is they immediately go, if you can't prove that person John Doe or Jane Doe is an HET, your hypothesis is totally invalid and you're crazy and you don't know what you're talking about. What I'm explaining to him is that if they don't understand the strategies and tactics and they don't know how to focus on the group tactics that ET is using, which they can see right now on a daily basis, they're just going to get frustrated and give up and go back to ufology because they won't get what they want. And this isn't about getting what you want. It's about recognizing what's really going on. And that's difficult for a person who's not,
I think a lot of people are myopic about these type of issues. Do you think there's a Men in Black type organization that's keeping these alien species in check? Like, do you consider yourself a part of that?
Aliens, so I would say the HET are the Men in Black with CEA. They are running the place, and if another alien or an HET decided they were going to try and spring the news to everybody, that guy would accidentally have an accident and die, or a CEA. For example, my guess is they probably tell too many uninformed Earthlings who they try and turn them into complicit Earthlings, maybe like a college kid, and then he starts going around trying to tell all his friends, and they told him, hey, you can't tell anybody, and then he has to die in a car accident with a bunch of his buddies because he opened his mouth and was going to cause too many problems for him. So I'm convinced there's a lot of really bizarre, dark stuff going on the planet behind the scenes. Like, all the events we see aren't just natural.
Like the JFK's assassination and
well, so I would look at
that.
JFK's assassination similar to Donald Trump getting the coronavirus. It's called TACTION, tactical misdirection. What they're basically doing is, because they know that JFK can die, they can have him fake his death. 5 minutes later, he's on another planet in a new body. But for the last, what did he die? 63, so yeah, 23, 63. Almost 60 years now. Think of the amount of time and energy that has been spent trying to figure out how JFK died. So just like a magician on a stage, he wants to create misdirection where, look at my left hand, everybody, while he's stuffing the rabbit in his hat with his right hand. So if you think of JFK dying, if you think of Trump getting the coronavirus,
COVID, yep.
If you think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying last week and creating all this Supreme Court turmoil before the election, all that every day has got the Earthlings going, look over there, look at this, look at that, look at this. But behind the scenes, what ET is really doing is they're preparing for the day when they're going to explain to everybody what's going on. And they're leaving these little subtle clues, which only a person who's aware that they've been living among us the whole time, that's aware that they have this plan for this extraterrestrial architecture they're developing, where all the technology they're rolling out on the planet each day is the technology that's getting them to the point where they can quickly transition the planet from being completely unaware of what's going on to being a fully functional interstellar planet.
So you don't think they just want to harvest us for food?
Well, it's not for food. It's to have us do labor.
Just their labor.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they eat us, I don't know. I don't get into that. You know, people say they take us for adrenochrome and all that. I just focus on a very small niche of the intellectual, militaristic engagement that's taking place. But what I'm trying to point out is that ET's plan is that if they can cause disclosure to occur, and the Earthlings were never able to figure out the whole time that they lived among us, they had control of us, and they're able to, what I call, flip the planet, turn the lights on, get the Earthlings aware that it's taking place.
Wake everybody up.
Well, but the Earthlings will still be so confused, kind of like when you wake up groggy in the morning, that the Earthlings will never come out of the groggy state and be able, as they proceed on with where the next phases of life go, they'll never be able to realize the actual way to control the destiny of their life.
Do these aliens also control other planets without Earthlings, like other alien beings, like other inferior planets? Like, are we just one of the many planets that they control?
Well, so for one, they definitely have star systems and planets that I would say are extremely vast that, for example, our ET system may control our universe. Within that universe, they may have a hierarchical structure where the most sophisticated ones are in charge of the whole universe. Lower level ones might get a galaxy. Another one might get, a planet. There's probably people who are more successful and less successful. Earth could be like a microcosm of how we live down here to how they live. I don't think they're all, maybe they live in a, what do you call it, where everything's perfect.
Utopia.
Maybe they're all, utopia. Yeah. Maybe everyone's equal. I don't think so, because in my opinion, if you were like that, why would you enslave people on Earth? I think that's demonstrating to me they've got some issues going on. But so what happens is a lot of it becomes philosophical, hypothetical. You challenge your mind to start looking at what's taking place on Earth to try to assess it. But the biggest thing to the whole thing is that, remember how when you went to school you had to learn ABC and 1, 2, 3, and you built a foundation of English and math that enabled you to go on in life and
for higher learning? Yeah.
Well, so there's basically that same basic premise that's taking place on Earth. The HET phase, the learning about the beings, the ABCs is taction, subnation, and ination, and the math is the CTVs, the vehicles, which gets into flying, ollieing, and vectating, which is the three forms of maneuvering within an atmosphere, outside of an atmosphere, but within a star system, and then interstellarly. So once you take the time to actually build the basic understanding and then you start growing upon it, you can see what's going on more. Whereas what 99% of the people do is they come in and they want to ask what I would call or PhD level questions because they're curious, like, well, does ET do this? Does ET do that? But they don't want to take the time to understand the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s because it's too work. Yeah. It's boring. It doesn't make sense. I don't see anybody else talking about it. Just tell me the cliff notes and let me get back to ufology. And I'm like, well, going back to ufology is just going backwards. You're not even, you have to realize ufology is wrong. So most people just aren't going to take the time to learn to understand because it's not, ET's got them in the sense that ET's a more sophisticated, technically advanced, knowledgeable, intellectually aware, elevated being. And you have to be willing to raise your intellectual awareness and think on the level of ET. And for most people, that's not easy to do.
I think it's a difficult thing for a lot of people. Well, Richard, it's been great talking to you, man. Listeners, you can learn more about Richard's organization it's ET UFO Disclosure.com, right? ET UFO Disclosure.com?
Correct. And then the easiest way to get me is just on Twitter at ET UFO Disclosure. I'm on there almost every day. I'm more than happy to chat with people and try and provide some insight if they're interested in learning how to understand this. And then if you just want to try and help or you're more curious, the Extraterrestrial Disclosure Petition at extraterrestrialdisclosurepetition.com is out there. Like I said, it's got over 10,000 signatures, and hopefully someday it'll make some change in the events that are taking place on the planet.
Definitely. People go check it out. Richard, it's been great talking to you, man. Take it easy.
Dee, I really appreciate your time. Thanks.